Hey everybody, I'm DJ Toxic Rainbow here with Coma Music Magazine. Today I'm going to be going over in more detail something that I've rigged up for Traktor and my live performances. Basically using my HTC One and my MacBook Pro, we're going to be controlling MIDI signals via the internet, via Wi-Fi, to manipulate effects, but it can actually be mapped to any parameters that you want in Traktor. I chose to do it to effects because using the accelerometer in my phone, it's pretty random the way that it moves, and so it just makes more sense to have it be on something that, sounds good random. So in order to do this tutorial well, you're going to have to know some basics about Traktor mapping, which there's a bunch of tutorials online on YouTube for free about that, and I'm going to go into it a little, but I'm not going to really explain the basics. So it's definitely something worth checking out beforehand. You can take a listen right now to this little demo of what the effects are. I'm using Traktor Pro. This is the beat slicer effect, so you'll hear a lot of glitching that will coincide with the movements on my hand. So yeah, you would probably not use it that much in an actual performance, but just for demonstration purposes, you could hear it. I found that it really works well with that glitch effect, but there's other ones on there that sound good too. So what's essentially happening is that this application that already exists on the Android market, I'm not sure if it's out on iPhone, I imagine so, or at least there's a version of it. This is called TouchDAW, and the screen that's held up right now is a screen that has an XY pad as well as a launch pad, and this XY pad can be controlled by touch or other sensors within the phone. So right now I have it set to be controlled by the accelerometer, which is something you can only do in the paid version, but if you want to test it out at home first, you can just download the demo, which will let you do it by touch. Then what's happening is here on the computer, using the built-in macOS 10 application called Audio MIDI Configuration, I've created a MIDI internet session that is all just done through the Wi-Fi on the computer. And here you can see that these two are TouchDAW, TDAW. These are the two ways that the phone is connecting to the computer, to macOS 10. And it's using RTP1 and RTP2. Technically, one of those is for the DAW controls in the program, because this is actually just only one screen of many in TouchDAW. But I just send both of them to the session because I don't know, it doesn't really make a huge difference for what I'm doing, but there is more control available for it. Then what happens is I filter that MIDI data coming through in this program called MIDI Pipe. So what MIDI Pipe does is it essentially takes data from as many MIDI input sources as you want. So here, for example, I have my DJ controller. I have TouchDAW running, and my DJ controller is running on USB, while this obviously is running through Wi-Fi. So Traktor can actually listen for signals via USB and over Wi-Fi at the same time, natively on macOS 10. It's also possible in Windows, but it's more of a challenge to set up. The problem is that you lose a lot of control when you just kind of run everything into Traktor, because there's the option to have all ports on or open, which allows MIDI to just flow through freely, but it can have some issues when you're using more than one controller, especially when you get down to working on separate channels, which we'll talk about in a second. So the first thing we have to do is set up the configuration of MIDI over Wi-Fi or over the network in macOS 10. So using Spotlight, I'm going to open Audio MIDI Configuration and make sure that the window that says MIDI is the one that's open. So assuming that you've already downloaded TouchDAW and that it's on, you will see two things here in your directory. One is TouchDAW RTP1 and TouchDAW RPT2. We have to connect those. I use both of them, like I said, but we have to connect them to our Wi-Fi. So that means making a new session. By clicking on this plus button here, I can take this session, name it whatever I want. So I'm going to name it HTC TouchDAW. Okay. And then selecting, okay, then activate it. Once it's activated, you'll see that it gets a port number and it says activated. Then down here, you can use connect to connect these channels. And that's really it. It's very, very simple to do, especially in macOS 10. So now you can see that the connection has been made in Traktor. It's pushing play on its own. I don't know why, but that's just something that it does. I think, actually I can't even guess why, but after 3 pushes, it stops. So that's actually something to think about too when you're performing. If you lose connection, make sure that that's not going to happen. Otherwise your music could just stop on its own. So now we need to check to see what controls are being sent by TouchDAW. So using this free program called MIDI Pipe, I'm going to bring in the first MIDI input. Okay, so we have this tools section. MIDI in is the first one. Drag it over to pipe. If I highlight MIDI in, I can click on this drop-down menu for MIDI input and select HTC TouchDAW. Mine says red because it's in Spanish, but yours will probably say web or network. And then I will bring a list in underneath. Selecting that list, this window pops up. And if I move my phone, you can see that there's actually live changes that come through. It shows us the channel, the data, and that's really the most important thing that we need to look out for with this is what are the MIDI data channels that are coming through. So what I'm seeing here is if I tilt my phone to, like on this axis, it says data 75. If I tilt it over here, I'm seeing 75, 71, and 74. So those are our 3 controls. What that actually means, what that translates to in this section is MIDI continuous control, or CC, 71, 74, and 75. I don't know why that's what it has, but it's just the default. And we can change that later if we want. So now coming over to Traktor, if I create a generic MIDI, this one I already have titled HTC TouchDAW, and add an input on the effects unit, for example, effects, knob 1. If I click learn, this moves so much that you can see on the screen it's actually not very effective to do it learn or do it in that way with the learn button. But we don't need to use it because we already know it's coming in channel 1, CC, and there were 71, 74, and 75. So now it's assigned. Change this to from direct to relative, and make sure it's going into effects unit 1 in this case. And there we go. I move my phone, and the knobs move on the screen. There might be a bit of a delay from the recording, but it all happens in real time. Then you would just do this again. We can go effects unit knob 2, channel 1, CC, 74. Effects unit 1, relative. I believe I've also had these be triggered as encoders, which can have just different effects on it. Once again, that's something that is really better for you to look at yourself. And you know, if you aren't familiar with what these terms mean, you can consult the manual or watch some tutorials about it. So now I'm going to go knob 3, CC data 75, which is right there. And change this to relative effects unit 1. Okay, perfect. Now, moving the phone, we can see that the knobs all move independently of each other. And mine are moving a little bit crazier than usual because I actually already have this mapped, so it's kind of getting like double the mapping. But everything, you know, these are very effective. The sliders down here, they work. You can see now if I move the rotary sensitivity up, my third knob is going crazy, but if I move it down, it's a little bit more natural with my movements. That might even be too far down. So you can play around with that and figure out what will work best for you. Then, of course, you need to assign a mapping that will turn the effects unit on. So in my case, what I used was on my DJ controller effects. It's this fader effects button. So that's already been mapped out. And now if we give this a shot, cue it up, and here we go. So it works. So now that you see how easy it really is to set this up, you don't need to know any programming. This software costs money, but it's not a whole lot. I believe TouchDAW is $4 or something like that in the Android market. But there are advanced settings that are important to take a look at. So in MIDI pipe, what I'm going to do now is show you how to route your channels, because if you're doing what I'm doing, which is using an outboard gear, like an outboard controller through USB, plus your TouchDAW, you're going to want to make sure that they're not communicating on the same MIDI channels. And I haven't run into any problems with having my phone on channel 1 and also my controller on channel 1 and 2. But it's likely that in the future, or the more mapping you do and the more complex you make it, you're going to run into some issues. So just to talk a little bit about MIDI pipe real quick, there's many options and ways to manipulate the MIDI data that comes in and that comes out. So the main thing that you're going to want to do in this particular idea is use the channel router. And the channel router will allow you to say, okay, channel 1, if the data comes in on TouchDAW as channel 1, then I want to convert that to, for example, channel 9, okay? That's just totally random. I opened up a list now. You can see that it still says in this channel section 1 there, but if I move the list down after channel router, it suddenly switches to channel 9. That means that any MIDI data that comes through on that channel, or I'm sorry, through TouchDAW, will now be converted to data on channel 9. It's a MIDI channel. That also means you have to change your mapping in Traktor, because what we have it mapped to currently is all MIDI CC 71, 74, and 75 through channel 1. But it's as simple as going to that same section that you went to in the first place to set the number and the CC control, but just hovering over channel 9. And then from there, CC, and let's see, I have that one selected. So now that's going to be on channel 9. And you want to do that because if you're using other controllers that are sharing channels, it's very likely that you're going to be twisting a knob that might already have CC channel 174 control built into it. And then you're going to have a lot of issues because your mapping is going to get crossed and it'll just be strange. When I'm actually performing, I don't use MIDI pipe because it does crash sometimes. I mostly use it as a way to set everything up. If you're going to be doing channel conversions, you have to have MIDI pipe open or other software that's similar in order to accomplish the conversions. Otherwise, your messages are just going to come in how they exit through the phone. One of the advantages of using this XY screen on TouchDAW is that it's customizable, and you can have these launchpad keys on there as well, which can add to extra mapping. So for example, one of the mappings that I have is that when I push this whole row of buttons, it automatically resets my effects in Traktor, because sometimes the knobs get stuck to one side a little bit. So it's really nice to have sort of like a panic button. But by using modifier keys in Traktor as well, you can do some very, very serious mapping in this. For example, I had this set up for a while. I don't anymore because my screen has just, I think there's a broken digitizer or something, so it became kind of an issue to have it mapped so in such detail. But what I was doing was holding this button down to act as a shift button. This was controlling loop in, and that was controlling loop out. So while this was attached to my arm and I was moving it around and all that stuff, just by looking down and using it almost as like a spy device, I could actually set loops on it and then control the loop size coming in from my MIDI controller, my general outboard gear from Stanton. So it's a great advantage, something that you can do, but definitely just check out all of the different windows that are available in TouchDAW. I think the ones that might be the most useful for DJing could be the keyboard, and then of course the Launchpad XY section. Now that you've seen the basics on how to control your Traktor program through Wi-Fi using TouchDAW and MIDI pipe, the possibilities are basically endless. You can find many other applications that do similar things, and you can even take advantage of using inputs that use things like the keyboard instead of just MIDI. We can definitely try as DJs to always think outside of the box, get outside of a screen. And as someone like myself who came from a background in vinyl, it was really important to me that I could figure out ways to really stay involved and be interactive and make an experience that was fun to watch and also fun to do while DJing digitally. So this is one way and one approach of doing that. Well, I look forward to hearing what it is that you guys do. Be sure to share any comments on the Como blog or in the section of this YouTube video. Once again, I'm DJ Toxic Rainbow, and I'll see you guys around.